All right.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Groupthink. Groupthink is our dialogue series at CU where we pick a topic and talk about whatever feels meaningful. My name is Madison, and I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, and I'm joined by some of our amazing community members, and for the first time ever, a special guest. So I'm going to give everyone a moment to introduce themselves. Mohammed, do you want to start off?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Mohammed. Thank you for having me as the first guest as part of Groupthink. I feel like like on the Tonight Show or like on Stephen Colbert. It's kind of cool. Um, Currently, I am a senior manager focusing on strategy and partnerships for the American Immigration Council, but specifically for a newly started or newly formed Center for Inclusion and Belonging. Um, Previously, I was at More in Common, which is a sort of a global research organization that focuses on trying to understand why societies or Western democracies are so polarized and socially divided. Um, my background's a little eclectic in that I come to this work by way of somewhat of a human rights background, but also a healthcare background. And so I glean a lot of my experience from sort of both those sources. But I've also been a part of quite a few large political mobilizations and organizing efforts. And so I bring all of that, mixture of all that experience into my current role and my work. So it's nice to be here with you all. So are we doing popcorn style? Should I just pass it to someone?
Usually people just like start unmuting whenever. So whoever wants to go next can go ahead.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, my name is Ashley. I am a high school senior from Vancouver, Washington.
And hello, my name is Chabu. I am 19 years old. I'm a first year at the University of Toronto, and I'm currently based out of Toronto.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm 23 years old. I run a platform called Gen Z Connect, and I am from Pennsylvania.
I'm Abigail, and I'm 17, and I'm a senior from Harrisburg, Missouri.
Oh, am I next?
Yes.
Okay. Whoops. So bad. My name is Gary. I'm one of the co-founders of CU, and I'm calling in from New York City. And Mohammed is awesome.
Yeah. Calling in from Queens.
Nice.
Madison, are you screen sharing or am I screen sharing? I forget.
Your screen sharing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So we screen share and kind of like take notes throughout the conversation, Mohammed.
That's good.
So now we can start the word association. Whenever you all are ready, just shout out your words.
I'm going to type up people's names.
I can get us started. For the word belonging, my word association is safety net. I think that if you have a space that you belong to, you have almost like the comfort of knowing that there are people in your corner, and that gives you like the additional freedom to go do things that are a bit more bold, a bit more courageous. So that's my word.
I'll go next. I'm going to say value, purpose, and enjoyment, because I feel like you feel these three things in a positive sense when you feel like you belong to something.
Anyone else have their words ready?
I guess I think about community and identity, just as like places and where like I often find belonging.
For me, I would say love and people. just because when I feel like I belong somewhere, I feel like I'm loved, and most of the time that is, like Ashley said, in community with people.
I'm gonna put peace and dignity. I feel like it's people turn to extremism when they don't feel like they have inner peace which is basically, to me, this very similar to not feeling like you have a sense of belonging anywhere.
Right. I would add compassion to that. So one word is compassion. I think another is, it's a verb. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that a verb?
Yeah.
All right. So like listening is important, I think. Those are the two that sort of are top of mind.
And why do those come to mind?
Yeah, I've been a believer across at least my career, but also my life generally, that if you can organize communities around their pain points, what it is that they're struggling with, then that cuts across some of their identities. It cuts across their political orientations. It cuts across all sort of visible traits in some way or another. And you're able to have a conversation more, through emotion, in a way that's quite meaningful and quite powerful. Listening is because I think there's a real, and Gary and I have actually discussed this, is that there's a real art to listening. And at least across our political dialogues, we listen to combat or to counter. And I think in order for us to achieve true belonging in this country, we have to develop a better ear so that you can then have a conversation around, compassionately and empathetically and so forth. So those are really the two, I think, two of the few pillars, I think, that are necessary for us to be able to build powerful, thriving communities, whether that's at your place of work, where you live, at your school, or sort of like whatever the form is. So.
I love that, especially the listening. And you're making me realize that we should do a group think about conversations or just listening in general. I think that'd be really good.
Yes.
Abigail, do you want to share your word association?
I guess just like security. That was what I could come up with that hasn't already been named. I'm kind of bad at these.
No, you're all good. All right. So now we can go ahead and get started with the conversation.
Great.
So I guess I would just pose first. What makes you feel like you belong, and whether that be in a place, with a certain person, or community?
I think that a characteristic of something that makes me feel like I belong is if it's like a space or a person, or even like an activity where I can experience the full range of human emotion. So like there's certain people where like they're great to celebrate with, but then there's like certain people where I'm going through something, or like you're in a tough situation, or you're navigating something that's a bit more nuanced and conflict prone, that's not the space that you want to be in. So I think that a space where you feel like you can experience a wide range of emotion, both the good and the bad, is the characteristic of feeling like you belong there.
I would say like something that makes me feel super curious, like curious to engage in it more, whether that's like a conversation with someone, just like super curious about learning more about them, or just continuing the conversation, or like an activity, just wanting to, like I said, learn more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I I think about spaces where like I feel like I can bring my full self, and like I don't need to like create a different version of myself. I don't need to hide different parts of myself. Like I am able to be accepted for who I authentically am.
Yeah.
To double back on what Ashley said, that reminds me of just like the importance of being in belonging in spaces where you can figure things out, so you can be wrong or you can be uncertain, and do that like openly. I think that gives a sense of belonging too, because it's accepting of like your full self in a way.
I feel like that's something we do really good at CU, because we all kind of adopt the mindset that like we're all constantly evolving systems, and just the idea of learning in public. One small example would be with my spelling situations in groupthink, especially towards the beginning. And at first, like I definitely felt like embarrassed, but I felt more comfortable over time because I know that this is a space where I do feel that sense of belonging, and I don't feel as embarrassed for learning in public anymore.
I think for me, just like places and people where I feel like safe and valued.
Can I ask I'm new to the structure, so I'm trying to sort of, I'm just going to ask if this is okay. Are we able to, can I ask a question in light of the answers that have been mentioned?
Yes,
Okay.
it's very free flowing. So
Okay. Yeah. I just don't want to mess up y'all. You know, your kind of your rhythm here.
No,
So it's, you know, we've unfortunately, because of quite a few factors, because of how we've all sort of geographically sorted ourselves, we've sorted ourselves using not only via geography, but also across the social media platforms we use, the news stations we watch, you know, and schools we go to, whether we're college educated or not, right? There's a lot of different variables in play here. You know, as I'm looking at the answers, there's elements of, you know, there's sort of pieces around security, there's pieces around bringing your full self. So not necessarily assimilating into an existing sort of community, but really wanting to add to that space. You know, there's a lot of that here. Do you guys think that you can create a similar kind of feeling of belonging? Do you feel that we can actually create belonging in a country as diverse as the United States, or in a diverse community? And I'm not generally talking just across race and ethnicity, although that's extremely important, but also across political orientation, and then even maybe from a different perspective of life, generationally, right? I feel like, you know, at least the millennial generation, and then sort of like the generations prior, I think we have a lot of difficulty around creating spaces of belonging for those who are either generationally different of a political orientation, or those who are just represents a different way of life. Do we think we can actually create those kinds of spaces that we're speaking about here?
I think this is such a cool question, but my answer is yes. I think that it's something that we can achieve.
Yeah.
But it requires redefining what it takes to have belonging. And from my understanding in the past, it's very much rooted in things that we have in common, and that's like the foundation of having a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And if there's a way to, if the requirement isn't about like what do we have in common, and more about the fact that like we're all here sharing this space, and that's enough, it's more than achievable. But again, it requires outgrowing and redefining the boundaries that we've placed around what it takes to feel like, yes, this is a place where I belong.
That's a great answer. That's just fantastic. I'm interested to hear more. from other folks here.
I think that Chabu, I like what you said about place is really interesting, because I feel like so much of belonging is about like having a place where where you feel comfortable and where it almost feels like a second home. And I think like we are living in a time where it's a lot easier to create places online with people who you might not like be co-located with. And I think that creates a lot more room for like belonging to not, I guess, like for the requirements of belonging, for things like not to be defined for you, but things that you are able to like create and generate by yourself. Yeah, so like you're just no longer locked into like, oh, like, I was born in this geographic area, so like this is where I belong.
Yeah, I also think that it comes down to smaller communities within those larger communities. So I think for CU, I know that I really feel a strong sense of belonging in one of our Junto groups, which is Cool Cats Crew. And our Juntos are groups of 8 to 10 people who meet weekly, and we're like accountability partners, and we just have discussions. And so because I feel a really close sense of belonging within that smaller one, I feel like I belong within the wider community of CU. And it connects me to so many other people as well. So I think that, like the same can be said with the country. Like if you feel a really close sense of belonging with people in your city or maybe even your state, it can help you feel closer to the bigger community as well.
I don't want to pose this question too early because I want to hear everyone else's thoughts, but I'd like to bookmark the thought of, is there a connection between our sense of belonging in smaller spaces, like within our family or our school? Does that impact our sense of belonging in wider spaces like our nation or our state?
Yeah, it's a great question. Can you expand on that? It seems like you might be speaking from a particular set of experiences or whatnot.
No, not necessarily. I think it was inspired by Madison's comment on just this idea of like feeling connected to our juntos or small groups that we have, which is like 8 to 10 people, and how that makes you feel connected to like a group of 200 people who I may not come across every day, but I still feel very connected to. And so just applying that context to other spaces. So if I like feel connected to my family and like my group of friends and my school, is that the foundation for feeling connected to my nation and the country that I live in and all these other spaces of belonging?
That's interesting, right? In some way, I mean, for me, I mean, as I'm reading the question again, I'm starting to think of learned behavior, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, my work personally, professionally, is to be able to influence attitudes and behaviors. And we do that through a number of, sort of some sophisticated, but in other ways, they're quite unsophisticated. But really, it's to move people across not a dimension, sort of politically, but certainly wanting to influence and change or influence behavior and attitudes. And I think, we learn a lot of our behaviors, and we sort of, we glean so much from those sort of small circles that we have. And I think sort of society, unfortunately, is continuing to operate in a way that is very, sort of quite closed-minded, and we're sorted into particular smaller camps. It doesn't it doesn't provide enough opportunities for us to be able to build sort of muscle or any sort of communications muscle that can help us sort of bridge across differences, right? That point around having more in common. Well, you can't have a conversation around what that might look like if you're not in those sorts of spaces. And so I think in one way, the sort of we're learning or we're operating from a set of behaviors that we're continuing to build on in spaces that we're quite sorted into. And so as I'm thinking about it, I think that's a huge sort of particular societal and systemic level that we need to be able to kind of, rethink and reimagine and redesign. And so, I mean, that's the, at least that's what the research sort of bears out.
I think that goes back to what Chabu said about redefining what it takes to feel like you belong somewhere, not just based on things in common, but like just on virtue of the fact like of the shared human experience. I feel like that's a lot about why we're connected at CU and what makes the sense of belonging so strong.
Right.
Yeah, like back to Chabu's comment from earlier, the question before, like I think people get so caught up in the complexities of their own realities and how different they are from others that like it pushes that divide between people instead of like starting conversations or going into things thinking like everyone else is saying, that we have that shared human experience and that we are all humans and have those similarities just by nature. So
yeah.
Okay, so I have a question. It may not be super coherent because it's based on all these questions. So if we're talking about like a redefining what makes people feel like they belong, and we're really getting like at what Julia was saying and what Chabu was earlier, like the human experience, how do we show people like just how interconnected we are just by virtue of the fact of like our shared human experience? Is there a way to do that? No.
How do we make visible our common threads of our human experience? Well, I'll just say one consideration to make is the tech platforms that we use, in particular the social media platforms we use. Say Twitter and, well, why don't we just look at Twitter? Twitter is really good for signaling. It's really good for status games. But that's the opposite of what actually connects people together, which is being really vulnerable and talking about your struggles, your, and a kind of deeper reflection that Chabu and Madison really spearheaded recently. So Mohammed, Chabu and Madison launched, like, I think it was, time flies, but it's been at least a month since we launched the platform, which is like internal to our community. It's anyone can write a piece. Tends to be very vulnerable that you wouldn't share on Twitter or Medium or anything. And there's something really special about that because, and this is top of mind for me because I was having a one-on-one with one of our community members who said that like reading other people's vulnerable posts gave her the confidence to write her own post and helped her realize that she wasn't alone in having lots of insecurities about things. And it made her feel a lot closer to Civics Unplugged and our members. Bless you.
Thank you. Sorry.
And this is in direct connection to what Gary just said. I think that actually in order to like see our visible common threads, for me, I find the common threads are like way more profound and way more powerful when I have like a deep founded respect for our distinctions and differences. So if I'm like engaging with someone and they're from a completely different culture, completely different like lived experience, have a completely different context or like lens at looking at life, when we find something that we have in common, it's like that much more powerful or that much more moving. And so I think that to make your common threads, I think that we have an understanding that, oh, these are 2 to 3 things that we may have in common, but for that to like really resonate enough to be something that connects and bonds you, I think you also have to have deep-founded respect for the distinctions and variances that there are between you and that person.
On that note, Chabu, I don't think it didn't sink into me even until, I mean, I like to think even just this year is when it really sank in, just how important differences are. Like a team cannot have just clones of one type of person. It doesn't work like that. You need all sorts of types of people. You need people that love accounting. Like you actually need people that love accounting. You need people that love meeting people all the time, right? And get really energized by that. You need people that love making white papers. You know, and I don't know. I think we are actually engineered to think about how we are, the way we think about our differences and similarities is engineered from a early age in a very pathological way, I think, because we are taught that we can be ranked from 1 to whatever from a very early age. And like, so we're always comparing each other, our differences, but not in like beautiful ways.
Right.
I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I always see, like for me, at least recently, I think that when I see distinctions and variances and like different preferences in people, it's the best thing ever because it also keeps me in the mindset of just like, I'm like, I know nothing almost, you know what I mean? Like everything's new, everything's like, there's ways that people go about things that I've never even considered. And that always like blows my mind when I see it. And that's exciting. And it also keeps you in the mindset of like constantly learning, which is way more productive than the mindset of being like, oh, I understand how like a person would operate in this situation always.
Yeah. You know, I would, I mean, you know, I would continue to push for, I would really push you all, and I push myself all the time, and Gary knows this, is to really I try to find, you know, see difference as a real motivator and see difference as a real opportunity to engage deeply and thoughtfully and meaningfully, right? If we're constantly looking for sameness, and that's exactly what you're going to get. And it's been shown through a number of different, whether white papers or research, or whether social psychological research, or even some of the biggest decisions that have been made in our country's history, that when in a room, when you've had lots of sameness, really bad decisions have been made. I mean, really bad. An example
Wow.
of that, and I mean, I don't want to bring sort of politics into this, but nonetheless, I think it's a really powerful example, is that back in 2004, when the Bush administration was thinking about going into Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction, there was a lot of sameness in that room. Everyone thought that there were weapons, you know, like WODs. And in fact, you know, many years later, really 3 to 4 years later, we ultimately found out that there was none. And in fact, the ulterior motive was that there had been always a 15 to 16-year vendetta in wanting to go into Iraq. And so, but there was a lot of sort of political sameness in that room that, you know, effectively made a catastrophic decision and costed the lives of thousands upon thousands of Americans, either their life or their living, in a real way. I mean, there's a number of political examples. There are also a lot of financial management examples. I mean, if you think of, for instance, the economic recession of 2009, 2010, 08, 09, 010, in the same way, there was a lot of sameness across the financial industry. And because of that, they all effectively made the same decisions, and every single bank did the same thing. And so in one sector, you had the same kind of mindset, and that costed millions of Americans their homes and their livelihoods, and we're still reeling from that, right? I mean, sector after sector. So there's a lot of credence to the fact that if you if you operate in environments with sameness, generally the decisions that are made won't be really good ones. But if you operate in environments where there's diversity of opinion and thought and context and experiences, I mean, that is so, so powerful, because it can not only help you grow, it can also help you become a better manager, a better leader, a better community member, more respectful of people's differences. And I think that's so sorely needed in a country like ours, especially at a moment like this. And so, yeah, I just wanted to sort of
Wow.
point that out. Yeah. Yeah. And then the point around bridging, right? So you might be questioning, well, if you have all these different kinds of folks, how do you then bridge, different convictions and opinions and thought processes? Well, there's an interesting point around finding common identities that we can organize around, right? We might be Democrats or Republicans. We might be Muslims or, Jews or Christians or Catholics or whatever. But really, what are the sort of the secondary and tertiary and sort of identities that we can organize ourselves around? Are we mothers? Are we brothers? Are we sisters? Are we people from the same state? Do we like the same football team?
Wow.
You'd be surprised as to how powerful those secondary and tertiary identities are, because it creates some bit of an opening that you can then build on. And I think we operate through an environment where our political orientation and some of our other orientations just define the context of our conversations and those who we dialogue with. Like, if you are from this, if you are from this city or this state, or you are this political orientation, or you like, or you're of this sort of conviction, I'm not talking to you. Well, in fact, that's just a loss for you yourself as a human being, but it's also a loss for the country. And in fact, when we really sink our teeth into the numbers, the things that we are suffering from in this country, it costs all of us in a real way, either financially through our tax dollars or through the sort of the destruction and of our communities and so forth. So there's real consequences to not being able to bridge across difference, both financial, political, social, psychological, and so forth. And so either you can go after sameness and we'll continue to make bad decisions as people and as a country, or we can really seek diversity as an opportunity to be transformational in our society. And so, we all get to make that choice and that decision every single day. So,
Boom.
Wow. Anyone have anything to add to that?
Abigail, I'm curious on this note, how, well, I know you grew up in a really small town, and I'm curious how your experience in CU in terms of like meeting a bunch of diverse, different people has affected your outlook on the world, anything.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, CU's been the first place where I really feel like I belong, and I didn't even realize that like I'd never felt like I belonged anywhere until like CU. So yeah, I don't know, just like kind of expanded my worldview and also like brought me to people whose interests and passions are similar to mine.
I know we only have 3 minutes left, so I think it's probably best if we don't start another question. We can just go ahead with the reflections.
No, we actually, well, we started at 45. Well, we actually started at 55. So why don't we go for like 10 more minutes and then start the reflection?
Okay.
I mean, just yeah, it's cool.
I want to pose a question. Mohammed, you talked about how there's a real cost in the fact that we choose not to like recognize our common threads.
Right.
So I guess my question is to understand why, in spite of those costs, do we continue to like adhere to this practice, even though it's proven to be really unhelpful at like a micro and macro level?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on exactly like, if you are, so let me back up here. So let's take the example of a company, right? A company that hires, to take Gary's point, if it hires, if your product as a company is to sell jackets and all you hire are accountants, you're not going to sell jackets, right? And so what tends to happen in a lot of spaces is that um, you know placing ourselves in spaces of difference is really challenging. It's psychologically challenging because you have to actually have some kind of orientation around compromise, right? And sometimes, I'm just sorry to say this, is that people don't want to compromise. They feel that the platforms that they've envisioned, that the ideas that they have are so powerful and so game-changing and worldly that there's no way there can be something better than what it is that that individual is sort of thinking around. So certainly there is an intelligence bias. So I think one element here is an intelligence bias. Another element is that, we have set specific sets of barriers in who we allow into our spaces and who we neglect to allow, right? And so a clear definition of that is, sorry, my wife's looking at me. She's like, "What are you doing? I didn't even know you were on a Zoom call." So one is an intelligence bias. Another is, say, in a lot of industries and in a lot of spaces, in order for you to feel really valued and included, you have to have a college degree, right? That leaves a whole assortment of people and a whole set of life experiences out of that process. And so really it's, I think, so I mean, I don't know how to sort of classify that factor, but certainly it's something that is absolutely warranting of conversation and sort of like dissection. And then a third, I think, is that we don't really, I think it's human beings tend to learn from their mistakes, right? It's sort of, but societies don't. And in a weird way, it takes societies an incredibly long time. It takes societies an incredibly long time to learn from their mistakes. And our political institutions in particular, I mean, they are so behind the curve. They're so behind the curve that it's I mean, they're generally about 10 years behind the curve. Just look at the issues with Facebook and Google and Apple. We knew they were monopolies 10 years ago, but only now is our entire judicial system across the country saying, oh shit, like these companies have a lot of power and eventually they're going to have more power than us. And so it's really those three things. It's an intelligence bias. It's a sort of sorting bias, right? And then sort of very much, lastly, I think it's this sort of this inefficiency around us learning from our behaviors as a society, not as individuals. Those are the three that pop out to me in my head right now. But yeah.
So I think I've said this to a few people who are on this call right now, but last week I learned something in one of my courses about the fact that we assume that institutions can learn the way human brains do, which isn't possible because when you say like an institution or a country or an organization is learning, you have to treat it like a metaphor. And an institution doesn't have a brain, like they cannot remember or recall an event. So people or individuals may learn, but that doesn't mean an organization can.
Right.
But with that being said, the way to like almost apply that metaphor continuously is to innovate and change and be responsive in your processes and procedures as an organization to implement your learning through that. And then that's how you can like retain a long-term understanding of like learning from your past mistakes. But no, those were all like really incredible points. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you'd be surprised, and this is why I absolutely have loved the work that CU has done. You know, I've been a part of it through a number of different avenues as an advisor and in other ways as well. And you'd be surprised. I mean, seriously, guys, like you'd be surprised at how bad institutions are in setting up the right kinds of protocols and processes in place for them to be able to be transformative and deal with, you know, up and coming, you know, sort of challenges. Even institutions that are that entire, you know, only hire from Ivy League, you know, schools and, you know, the best colleges in the world and the best companies in the world, you'd be surprised at how bad they are in setting up the proper procedures and protocols. And that's one of the things that did actually surprise me quite a bit. And which makes the case even more for why diversity is so crucially important, because these flock of folks are operating along the same dimensions that they've been operating for 30 years, and they don't see no problem with that. And then this is also a question, I think, you know, for us, you know, for you all to evaluate, is a question around value, right? There is obviously financial value in operating in a particular way, right? A financial company can say, well, our bottom line has been, you know, has been sort of creating multiple, you know, on your investment or so forth. But what we're learning now is that, you know, there's really different sort of dimensions of value. There's financial value, there is societal value, there's psychological value. There's all these different ends of value. And I think we have to incorporate that in our analysis of where we're moving in as a society. And so it's not just that we are becoming richer, but really what is that ultimately producing? An example of that is the issue with OxyContin or you know, like opioids. That company kept pushing opioids out into the United States. On one dimension of value, they were making enormous amounts of money. It was great for the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, it was fantastic. But what was the societal value? It was nothing. We destroyed people's lives. And so really, again, when you operate with the level of sameness and only across one dimension of value as you measure that, then you're generally going to make bad decisions that, you know, are completely the antithesis of where we should be headed as a society. And so, yeah.
Hard to follow that. I mean, one of the things that this question and the answers so far have conjured for me is the recognition that the history classes that I took in school were so not helpful in guiding my civic actions. What did I learn about the civil rights movement besides that, like, almost like there's almost like individuals had everything to do, like 5 people had everything to do with like changing the world, versus like the millions of people that played their own civic superheroic role, in different roles, right? Different types of people playing different roles, complementary roles in over many, many decades, if not hundreds of years, to make progress. And what I do know is that I had a bad education. What I don't know is the answers to all the different types of people that were contributing to it. And I'm starting to learn more, but it's embarrassing how little I know.
I think the idea of like differences not only being present but being complementary is really interesting because like at least in school and group projects, it's like get people with like a different skill set. But if either like people don't know what that skill set is or like what other people would be working on with their skill set, like it's kind of not that it's useless, but it's counterintuitive to have a variety of different people there if they aren't actually complementary to like what the overall goal is or how the dynamic of like a team or just a community is in general.
Yeah, I think Mohammed put really beautifully the why of the differences, and the why of avoiding just pure sameness.
This is very much a reflection of what Mama said earlier, but I think that there's something empowering about like the falsehoods that are involved in like the things that we believe in that we associate with belonging. So like if I like my foundational understanding of something allows me to do certain things, engage in certain projects, or empowers me in the way that I operate now, to question them would also be questioning everything else that I'm engaged in, that maybe that almost like questioning the positive externalities of like what I'm engaging with, if that makes sense. So I think that it's hard to reconcile that it may be wrong, because then you have to call in so many other things into question as well.
Unless anyone has anything to add to that, I think we move on to the reflection section. Madison, as you type that out, I'll explain the section. It's just, yeah, so let me actually copy and paste this in so you can kind of scan on your own. But to everyone in Mohammed, we kind of just like look throughout the doc and see and like identify like patterns or just reactions that you have to the conversation, and about the process of groupthink, whatever comes to mind. So we'll give it like 30 seconds of, before we start that section, or whoever has a reflection so far can shout it out now. Sorry, Madison, you said, will you fix what, please? Anyone have a reflection?
I just like how we shifted the conversation from like finding comfort in similarities to more so power and differences.
Yeah, I'd say this conversation put words to why it's fun. It's fun to open Slack every day, because we get to learn more about the different amazing people in the community that are very, in many ways, very different than us, but appreciate those differences a lot.
I think I saw a lot of like us discussing this in multiple contexts. So like in the context of CU, in the context of politics and like wider global issues. And I think that it was really cool to see almost like the application of our theories in different ways, and it really enriched the conversation. So that was cool to be a part of.
Just like reading back on the doc, I think Abigail's point of like shifting from a smaller town to a community like CU. It just kind of reminds me of the fact that like you don't really, it's kind of like with friendships too, like you don't really realize like the possibilities of a good friendship until you've like had a good friendship. And so in the same way, like community means so much more when you're in one that makes you feel like that makes you feel that sense of belonging. So it's cool to be like part of one, to realize like how empowering that is and how they can be or how more people can plug into that.
Yeah, I just want to add one piece. I mean, just to follow up on that. Yeah, I've been part of spaces where I have felt a deep sense of belonging. I have found across at least earlier part of my career so far that it is extremely hard to replicate. You know, sometimes we think we can just take kind of the structure of an initiative or an enterprise or of a community, and we can just sort of replicate it in a new domain or a new setting. And I think, you know, you often then run into quite a few challenges because, you know, maybe that space is not filled with the same kind of folks, and they might come from different orientations and different identities and so forth. And so sort of less from a perspective of replication, but more from a perspective of process, right? If you can really dial down the sort of the process that it took for CU to become the community that it has, then that is something that you cannot entirely replicate, but at least you know sort of the kind of the ins and outs, right? The nuts and the bolts of it. Like you've got the nuts and bolts now, and you can just sort of, you know, you might be using a different piece of wood, but it's wood nonetheless, right? And so I think, you know, that's how I have learned through failure that replication is not the answer. And neither is duplication, but rather understanding that you can really export the process and then try to at least install it in a way that sits well with sort of that new space. Yeah.
Wow, that makes so much sense. And I had to learn that the hard way because, you know, I said something about Juntos earlier, but I tried to do something similar with my family, and it did not go well. And I think it's because, like you said, like you can't replicate the exact same structure. And I think a lot about what I need to come to understand is that, like, what I'm taking from CU is the tools. And I've seen that play out in different parts of my life. Like, because of the conversation that I've had, I've been a better listener and a better, like, question asker in different parts. But I mean, what you're saying now about, like, the replication makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah.
Madison, it kind of reminds me of summer camp in the sense that like we almost tried to like directly replicate the fellowship, and I think we like noticed kind of like halfway through that wasn't like working as well as I think we intended it to. So yeah, for sure that resonates.
Something maybe for a future exploration is the role of leaders in creating, I guess, the soil of belonging upon which people can feel like they belong.
And to kind of add to the conversation of looking for belonging in other spaces, I completely agree with the fact that it's severely rare, unfortunately. But I think that having a space that you belong to makes it easier to exist in other spaces where that may not be true, but you can like still hold those values and that culture even in the absence of it. So it's almost like learning through this experience makes it easier to operate without it in other spaces.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So I have a few targeted questions. Abigail, how was this group thing for you? This is your first one, right?
I was at the one for
Oh, second,
technology,
right.
but I didn't like participate that much.
Cool. How was this one?
It was good. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. Everyone's really cool.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm bad at
No, I mean, everyone will take the compliment. Mohammed, how about this for you? This is an experiment, but I think we're glad we did it.
Yeah, I thought it was good. You know, you can sort of probe question after question. I thought that was really, really helpful. I liked structuring it in the ways that you all have, right? Sort of the point around the word association leading into a broader conversation, which leads into a sort of a wrapping reflection. You know, it's, you know, I didn't come with the, you know, the examples that I mentioned. I didn't come armed with those pre-conversation, just sort of came top of mind. But I do think that an element around application is probably quite helpful and quite useful, especially in helping you all sort of build the tools that are necessary as you move on into your, either whether you're in school or after school or sort of like whatever the case may be, really. So I think some sort of applied sort of systems thinking is quite, might be quite helpful.
What was, how did other people like bringing on a guest / Muhammad in particular?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really helpful. I mean, just like on the topic of diversity, obviously, like we're having all these conversations, but we're all either like high school seniors or like Chabu's a college freshman. And so we are lacking diversity in that sense as well. And so I think it was like a perfect conversation to bring you into. And as far as your point on the application, I think that we can turn the reflection section into like a reflection and application section, because we're kind of like reflection, we're kind of already doing that. We just need to like maybe like take some thoughts a step further on application.
I think that it was an amazing, I think it was like a really cool group think in the sense that you were able to like present insight and like recall like really specific examples in the world that I think also like provoked me to tap into that understanding that I might have a little bit more than I normally would. So I think that it was cool having a guest, and we should definitely try and do this again.
So Mohammed, we've been iterating literally every time. Like I mean, it's small, but last time we added bold and this color in the headings.
Yeah.
We didn't have word association a few times ago.
It's good.
Yeah, this is like you're helping pilot the latest iteration, and then the next one will probably have next steps. Well, and
Yeah.
Sorry, on the note, Mohammed, and do you have any next steps on how, like, you know, your plans that before groupthink may have changed at all, or thinking or anything?
Yeah, you know, as you were speaking and sort of scrolling up, I started thinking about sort of, you know, like what I do a lot initially when I'm starting a large, you know, I specialize, I guess, in sort of national, like, you know, large, multifaceted, multi-integrated sort of campaigns. And what we do often, we do a landscape analysis. And in this way, what you all are doing in the conversation is a landscape analysis. Your word map is effectively a sort of a broad landscaping. Your sort of the question series is trying to sort of probe that map. And then your reflection is finding all sort of the connective threads in between that. And I think that's an incredibly helpful process, both in conversation, but also across any specific organization. And again, you'd be surprised at how many organizations, no matter how well funded they are or who they have working for them, don't follow sort of such a constructive roadmap around engagement. So just like thinking of it that way, although I knew that sort of that was generally the structure, but sort of helping myself to communicate it in that kind of visual format is something that I'm going to take away from. It's something that I'm going to take away from this conversation. So thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts before we close? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mohammed, for taking the time out of your night. We really enjoyed having you. And I will see you all next week. Have a happy holiday.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.